They didn't scream. They didn't run. They just stood there watching the barn burn, flames licking the night sky like the devil's own tongue. The name still glowed in the wood, carved deep like someone meant it to last. Hannah, not painted, not written, carved with a knife. Two gunshots had shattered the night's silence moments before. Two precise cracks that echoed across Redemption Creek like thunder breaking over the Wyoming mountains. Now Mason Blackwood stood before the gathering crowd, his Colt Army revolver still warm in his hand, smoke rising from the barrel like a ghost in the moonlight. At his feet, a man lay writhing, clutching a bloody thigh. Another had fled into the darkness, leaving only boot prints in the dust, in a burning barn in his wake. "She don't sleep in there no more," Mason announced, his voice carrying across the crackling flames. His face, half illuminated by the fire, showed no emotion, just the weathered determination of a man who'd seen too much death to fear any living soul. "She stays in my house now. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me in this Colt." The townspeople of Redemption Creek stood frozen, not from the chill of the Wyoming night in 1875, but from the ice in Mason's voice. A voice that had commanded men during the bloodiest battles of the war between the states. A voice that didn't issue threats, only promises. Sheriff Thomas pushed through the crowd, his ancient Remington drawn but pointed downward. "This you're doing, Blackwood?" he asked, nodding toward the wounded man. "He and his friend came to deliver a message from Puller," Mason replied, holstering his weapon with practiced precision. "I delivered one back." Behind him, the barn collapsed in a shower of embers that rose toward the stars like fleeing souls. 1 week earlier, the stagecoach had rolled into town trailing dust clouds thick as sin. The wheels groaned under the weight of more than just the passengers. Nobody waited for its arrival. Nobody had in years. Mason watched from the doorway of his forge, hammer still in hand, sweat cooling on his brow. The twisted metal of his left leg brace glinted in the sunlight, a permanent souvenir from Gettysburg that gave him the slight limp the townsfolk had grown accustomed to seeing. The heat from the furnace behind him was nothing compared to the fire that ignited in his chest when he saw her step down. Hannah Sullivan. 8 years gone and now returned like a ghost made flesh. She wore a torn dress dusted red from the trail, one strap dangling off her shoulder, exposing a bruise the color of a thundercloud. Her knees were scraped raw, and her arms bore marks that looked suspiciously like fingernail tracks. But it was her eyes that stopped Mason's breath cold, flat and empty as a winter sky, windows to a soul that had seen too much. She didn't ask for help, didn't look up, just placed her hand on the stagecoach wheel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Hannah Sullivan," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the onlookers like a stone dropped in the still water. The preacher's daughter, once the pride of Redemption Creek, now a ghost with skin. "Reckon the devil sends back what's his when he's done with it," muttered Tess Raymond, the mayor's wife, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Most folks turned away, shame or judgment or some unholy combination darkening their faces. But not Mason. He watched, one hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, as Hannah swayed slightly before steadying herself. When she spoke, her voice carried just far enough for those closest to hear words that burned deeper than any brand. "Use me. Break me. Just get me out of here." Dr. Mills stepped forward then, the only one brave enough to approach her. He led her gently toward his house at the end of the street, murmuring something about rest and recovery. Hannah followed like a sleepwalker, never once looking up to see Mason's eyes tracking her every move. That night, Mason didn't sleep. He sat on his porch cleaning his Colt by lamplight, remembering a young girl with laughing eyes who'd once beaten every boy in the county at shooting contests. Remembering how her father, Preacher Sullivan, had been the only one who welcomed a broken soldier home from war When Mason returned with a mangled leg and nightmares that wouldn't quit, how the preacher had given him purpose again, helping him set up the forge, how they'd been more family to him than his own blood. By dawn, he had made his decision. Mason's boots made no sound as he approached the doctor's house. The loaf of bread was still warm, wrapped in clean cloth. Beside it, he placed a strip of jerky, and after a moment's hesitation, a small Derringer pistol, not much but more than anyone else had offered. He turned to leave, quiet as always, but her voice caught him mid-step. "You here to take your turn too?" Mason froze. Hannah stood in the doorway, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders despite the warm night. Her voice wasn't frightened, wasn't angry, just hollow, like she'd said those words too many times to too many men. "The gun's loaded," he replied, not turning around. "Keep your finger light on the trigger." A soft, bitter laugh. "When did I ever need shooting lessons from you, Mason Blackwood? Or did you forget who outshot you at the Harvest Festival? 16 years old, and I put 5 bullets through the same hole while you were still trying to steady your hand." Now he did turn, and something in his chest ached at the sight of her standing there. Broken but not bent, wounded but still fighting. "Your father was proud that day," he said quietly. "Told everyone in 3 counties his daughter could outshoot any man west of the Mississippi." Her eyes flashed with something, a ghost of memory. "He taught me well. Said a woman alone needs to be twice as dangerous as a man." He was right. My father is dead. I know. I dug his grave myself. With this leg, it took all day. Mason tapped his metal brace, the sound sharp in the quiet night. "He was the only one who saw me as more than just another broken soldier when I came back." Hannah studied him for a long moment, the moonlight casting half her face in shadow. "Why'd you bring me a gun, Mason?" "Same reason I helped you practice shooting back then. World's full of wolves." "And what are you?" Mason met her gaze steadily. "Just a man who remembers his debts." He turned and walked away, the uneven rhythm of his steps marking his departure, but not before he caught the first real emotion crossing her face, a flicker of recognition, of shared memory. By morning, a red ribbon lay on his doorstep. Not new, not fancy, just hers. A silent acknowledgement, a beginning. The Puller gang controlled everything worth having in Redemption Creek, the silver mine on the North Ridge, the saloon where men lost their month's wages, the shipments in and out of town. Marcus Puller himself stood at the bar, a whiskey in one hand and the town in the other. A big man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. A man who'd come west after the war with nothing but ambition and a willingness to use any means to satisfy it. "Preacher's daughter is back," said Tanner, his right-hand man. Puller's glass paused halfway to his lips. "Sullivan's girl. Thought she died or worse." "Looks like worse," Tanner chuckled. "Word is she's been working on her back in Denver. That's why folks turned away, afraid she'd bring shame and disease to our respectable town." "Interesting." Puller set down his glass. "Sullivan always claimed there was no silver on that church land. Never did believe him. Think she's back for the property. Don't much care why she's back." Puller's eyes narrowed. "Just care that she leaves, or stays permanently." He glanced toward the window, watching as Mason crossed the street toward the doctor's house for the 3rd morning in a row. "And what's our war hero so interested in?" They were close before she left, him and the girl. Sullivan took Blackwood in after the war, gave him purpose when he couldn't even walk straight. Some folks thought the preacher was hoping his daughter and the blacksmith might make a match of it someday. "Before she ran off to become a whore," Puller snorted. "Before her father had his accident," Tanner corrected with a meaningful look. Puller's face hardened. "Find out what she knows about her father's land," he ordered, "and remind Blackwood that even heroes with fancy war medals bleed just like everyone else." By the fourth day, Hannah had moved from the doctor's house to a chair outside. Not hiding, not inviting, just there, close enough to hear the rhythmic ring of Mason's hammer from the forge, far enough that no one could claim her. She wasn't healing, not yet, but she was present, and sometimes that's all surviving looks like. Inside the forge, Mason shaped red-hot metal with methodical precision, each strike of his hammer driving away the images that haunted him. Hannah, broken and hollow. Preacher Sullivan, found at the bottom of a ravine 8 years ago, an accident no one questioned too closely. The war that had taken his youth, his innocence, and nearly his leg. The door's shadow darkened, and Mason looked up to find Hannah standing there, watching him work. "Your hands got steadier," she observed, nodding toward the horseshoe taking shape on his anvil. "War teaches a man to control his shakes," Mason replied, "or it kills him." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his hammer and the hiss of hot metal and water. "They're saying things about me in town," she finally said. "People always talk. Doesn't make it worth listening. They say I'm ruined, used up." Her voice remained flat, emotionless. "That I bring shame to my father's memory. They're not wrong." Mason set down his hammer, fixing her with a steady gaze. "I rode with the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry at Gettysburg. Watched boys younger than you die screaming. Came home to find my wife dead from fever, my leg mangled, and no place that felt like home until your father offered me one." He picked up the cooling horseshoe. "We all carry scars, Hannah. Some just show more than others." "I killed a man in Denver," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out like she couldn't hold them anymore. "He kept me locked in a room for months, used me, sold me to others. One night he got drunk, left his knife out. I took it." Her hands trembled slightly. "I'd do it again." Mason nodded slowly. "I've killed 43 men that I counted. Some deserved it more than others. Not a single one keeps me awake at night. Is that supposed to comfort me? No, but this might." He reached under his workbench and pulled out a folded paper. "Your father's church land. Deed's still in your name. No one's touched it since he died." Hannah took the paper, her fingers leaving smudges on the yellow document. "That's not why I came back." "Then why did you?" Their eyes met across the forge, heat shimmering between them that had nothing to do with the furnace. "To finish what he started." The trouble came faster than either expected. 3 of Puller's men cornered Hannah near the well the next morning. Not overtly threatening at first, just laughing too loud, standing too close. One tossed a pebble that landed at her feet with a mocking plink. "Heard you charge by the hour," one said, a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth. "Or is it by the act?" Hannah kept her eyes down, one hand slipping into her pocket where the derringer waited. Her finger curled around the trigger, the way her father had taught her. "Breathe slow. Squeeze. Don't pull." The second man stepped closer, pretending to trip, fingers brushing the hem of her skirt. "Damaged goods come cheaper, I always say." That's when Mason rounded the corner, not rushing, not calling out, just appearing like a storm front rolling in from the mountains. He didn't draw his gun, didn't need to. The way his hand rested near the walnut grip of his Colt spoke volumes. "Mornin', gentlemen," he said, voice pleasant as a rattlesnake's warning. "Seems you're blocking the lady's path to the well." The men exchanged glances, measuring the threat in Mason's eyes against their own courage. "No harm meant, Blackwood," the first man said, backing up a step. "Just being friendly." "I'm sure Miss Sullivan appreciates your concern for her social life." Mason stepped forward, positioning himself between Hannah and the men. "Now I suggest you find somewhere else to be friendly before I forget my manners." They retreated, not running, but not walking proud either. The message had been delivered on both sides. This wasn't over. When they were alone, Hannah exhaled slowly. I could have handled them. I know, Mason replied, helping her draw water from the well. But a wise man once told me that just because you can carry a load alone doesn't mean you should. My father said that, she whispered. Yes, he said it to me when I was too stubborn to accept help with this leg. Said it to you when you insisted on chopping your own firewood at 12 years old. For the first time since her return, Hannah's lips curved in something close to a smile. I forgot how he could make stubbornness sound like a sin. Only when it hurt the one being stubborn. That evening, Hannah led Mason to the abandoned church at the edge of town. Weeds grew through the floorboards, and dust covered the few remaining pews. But the stained glass window behind the altar remained intact, casting colored shadows across their faces. He found silver, Hannah said, running her fingers along the underside of the pulpit until something clicked. A small compartment opened, revealing a folded map and a leather-bound journal. A vein richer than Puller's mine. He kept it secret because he wanted the prophets to build a school, a hospital, her voice caught. A future for this place beyond just surviving. Mason studied the map, recognition dawning. The ravine where they found him. Hannah nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. He was surveying the claim when he fell. I found this map among his things before I left, and his journal. She opened the worn book to a marked page. His last entry mentions Puller by name, says he was being threatened, but wouldn't sell. Why come back now? Because I finally realized running doesn't heal anything. She took back the map, her fingers brushing his. And because some debts can only be paid in blood or silver, I prefer silver. Mason's expression darkened. Puller won't give up what he thinks is his without a fight. I'm counting on it, Hannah said. And for the first time since her return, determination hardened her features, sharp as the knife she'd used in Denver. The attack came 3 nights later. Mason had insisted Hannah stay at his place outside town. Safer than being alone, he'd argued. She'd relented only after he'd promised to sleep in the barn, giving her the house. The sound of approaching horses woke him shortly after midnight. 4 riders moving slowly to muffle their approach. Mason slipped out the back of the barn, Winchester repeating rifle in hand, and circled around to flank them. The first shot took the lead rider in the shoulder, toppling him from his horse. The second struck a lantern one man carried, spraying oil across the ground and igniting a patch of dry grass. Hannah! Mason shouted as gunfire erupted around him. Wake up! Inside the house, Hannah was already moving, Derringer in one hand and her father's old Remington revolver in the other. She'd slept fully clothed every night since Denver. A bullet shattered the window as she ducked low, crawling toward the door. Outside, Mason fired methodically, each shot finding its mark despite the darkness. His Winchester clicked empty after dropping a second man. He drew his Colt, the familiar weight steady in his hand. Then a searing pain tore through his right shoulder, a lucky shot from the third attacker. Mason staggered but stayed upright, returning fire. His bullet went wide, grazing the man's horse instead. The animal reared, throwing its rider. Hannah stepped onto the porch and took careful aim with the Remington. The heavy revolver bucked in her hand, but the shot was true, striking the fallen rider before he could recover. The fourth man retreated, dragging his wounded companion. She found Mason behind the water trough, blood soaking his shirt from shoulder to elbow. How bad? She asked, tearing strips from her petticoat. I've had worse shaving, he grunted, though his face had gone pale beneath his tan. Bullet went clean through. You still remember how to stitch a wound? Hannah worked quickly, cleaning and binding the injury. You're lucky. Another inch and it would have hit your heart. Mason caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. Who says it didn't all those years ago when you left? In the distance, the barn erupted in flames, a final act of vengeance from the retreating men. Neither of them looked at it. Their eyes remained locked on each other, something passing between them that needed no words. "We finish this tomorrow," Hannah said finally, helping him to his feet. "One way or another?" Dawn broke over Redemption Creek to find Mason and Hannah riding side by side down the main street. Mason sat stiffly in his saddle, face drawn with pain, but eyes clear and determined. His wounded shoulder was bandaged beneath his coat, his Winchester resting across his lap. Hannah rode beside him, her father's Bible in one hand, the silver map and journal in the other, her hair pulled back severe and tight. The town had gathered, drawn by rumors of the night's shooting. Marcus Puller stood on the steps of the saloon, flanked by Tanner and the remains of his gang. "Quite a show you two are putting on," Puller called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Shame about your barn, Blackwood. Accidents happen in the dark." Mason reined his horse to a stop in the center of the street. "No accident when your men came looking for a fight and found one." "My men?" Puller spread his hands innocently. "I heard it was just some concerned citizens worried about the moral character of our town. What with an unmarried woman staying with a man of questionable reputation?" Hannah urged her horse forward. "Let's stop pretending, Marcus." She held up the Bible. "My father knew what you were the moment you arrived in Redemption Creek, a vulture circling what good people built." Whispers spread through the crowd. The townspeople who had turned away from Hannah now watched with newfound interest, sensing the shift in power. "My father found silver," Hannah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Not on your land, but on a church property. He planned to use it to build a future for this town, a future you stole when you murdered him." She opened the journal, reading aloud. "Marcus Puller threatened me again today. Says if I don't sell the church land, I'll regret it. I will not be moved by fear. The silver God placed here will serve his purposes, not the greed of men." She looked up, eyes blazing. "Written the day before his accident." Puller's face darkened. "Careful with accusations, girl. Your reputation's already beyond saving. Don't add liar to the list." "She's not lying," came a new voice. Sheriff Thomas, old and weathered as the hills, stepped through the crowd. The star on his chest caught the morning light. "I've been waiting years for someone brave enough to say what needed saying." "You have no proof," Puller snarled. "I have a witness." The sheriff nodded toward a thin man hovering at the edge of the crowd. "Your former driver, Jenkins. Turns out a man's conscience weighs heavy after 8 years. He saw you push the preacher into that ravine." Something shifted in the crowd then, a turning tide of sentiment. Faces that had looked away from Hannah now turned toward Puller with new suspicion. "This is absurd," Puller laughed, but the sound held an edge of desperation. His hand inched toward his gun. "You'd take the word of a whore and a crippled soldier over a businessman who built this town?" "You didn't build anything," Mason said quietly, shifting his weight to ease his wounded shoulder. "You just took what others created and claimed it as your own." Puller's control snapped. His gun cleared its holster with practiced speed, but not fast enough. Mason's Colt fired once, the bullet striking Puller's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning into the dust. Before anyone could move, Hannah's Remington roared, the shot striking Puller square in the chest. He staggered back, shock registering on his face as he looked down at the spreading crimson stain. "That wasn't for me," she said, lowering the smoking gun. "That was for my father, and for every person in this town who's lived in fear too long." Puller collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. The silence that followed was broken only by Tanner dropping his weapon and raising his hands, the fight gone out of him. One by one, the townspeople approached. Some offered awkward apologies to Hannah. Others simply nodded with newfound respect. Dr. Mills stepped forward to examine Mason's wound, insisting on proper treatment. And Tess Raymond, who had spoken so cruelly of Hannah's return, stood silent with downcast eyes until her daughter, a girl of 16, took her hand and led her forward. "Miss Sullivan," the girl said softly, I'm sorry for how you were treated. My father says you're going to build a school? Hannah looked at the girl, then at Mason, something softening in her gaze. Yes, a place where anyone can learn, no matter what. 3 months passed. The autumn leaves turned gold and crimson across the Wyoming territory. On the site of the old church, a new building rose, the beginnings of a school, funded by the Sullivan silver mine. Mason's barn had been rebuilt, larger than before, a section converted into a new forge where two anvils now stood side by side. His shoulder had healed, adding another scar to join the collection that mapped his journey through life. The town had changed too. With Puller gone, people spoke more freely, smiled more easily. The silver mine operated under Hannah's direction, with fair wages and safer conditions. A portion of every month's yield went toward building the promised hospital. Hannah stood in the doorway of the forge, watching as Mason carefully engraved her name on the handle of a revolver, the letters flowing like ripples in still water. It's beautiful, she said as he held it up for her inspection. Custom made, he replied. Balanced for your hand. Took the silver for the inlay from the first ore we pulled from your father's mine. She took it, feeling its weight. Perfect, as she knew it would be. I still outshoot you, you know. A rare smile crossed his face. I'm counting on it. Outside, two horses waited, saddled and ready. Not for running, not anymore, but for riding to the mine, where workers had struck a new vein that morning. They weren't lovers. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but they were partners, survivors, builders of something new from the ashes of what had burned. As they mounted up, a red ribbon fluttered from Hannah's saddle. Not new, not fancy, just hers. A reminder of how far she'd come, of promises kept and debts paid. In this western country, Mason said as they rode toward the ridge where Hannah's father had once stood, a person isn't judged by their past, but by how they face their present. Hannah looked at him, her eyes no longer empty but filled with purpose. And their future? That, Mason said, we write ourselves. Behind them, Redemption Creek spread out like a promise kept, and ahead the mountains rose to meet a sky as wide and free as hope itself. The townspeople, once turned away in judgment, now nodded in respect as they passed. Not because they'd forgotten who Hannah had been, but because they'd finally seen who she truly was. And sometimes that's all redemption looks like.